Hello, Rantbox TV watchers. I'm John Clay, your, regular host. I am joined by Ruby Scott-Anderton. How are you doing, Ruby?
I'm good. Hello.
Fantastic. Ruby had first and foremost, she had a wonderful picture she's made to do with our with our specific topic today, which is about love. I'm basically going to be asking Ruby to answer. Ruby basically asked me some questions about love for a project that she did ages ago. And we really liked the conversation. And so here she is now, and she's going to ask me these questions, which I have no idea what they really could be now in terms of answers. It's been some time since I've spoken about love. I'm going to be trying to be as candid as possible. Ruby, just take it away whilst I embarrassingly offer the floor to you.
Okay, so I guess like my first question, which is a personal one, is just basically the famous question, like what actually is love? And then a joint on question to that is love always, or is love well-meaning, positive? Yeah, is love a healthy, well-meaning thing?
Okay, so first one is, what is love? Are we talking about romantic or are we talking about platonic love?
Um, Originally I was going with romantic love. Yeah.
Okay, romantic love. Um, God, it's a hard question to answer because ultimately I want to say when you love someone, it's because you love what they have as a being, as an existence. You go beyond liking it, beyond appreciating it, from being something that's there to something that you want to partake in, beyond it being a platonic existence thing. You want to express how you feel about them verbally, physically, and understand that you're in your similar ideologies, that you can create a path together in this world, companionship. So that will be my contracted answer, I think. That's what I think love is.
For me, like also one of the questions, sorry, I'm just bombarding you with them, but do you feel like we
Oh,
because
oh,
no
I lost
matter
you there. Can
what.
you repeat that? We lost you.
Yeah, like I was just wondering whether you feel, or if anybody feels like love is built into our kind of survival mechanism, because
Wow.
um, I guess there's all sorts of types of love, but no matter where you look in the world, it's definitely one of the things that most humans tend to make sure that they have within their life, kind of just like food. So,
Is love built into our survival? I've said before that teamwork is built into our understanding of evolution, of maintenance of constructs, maintenance of um, a sewage system. You're going to have to work with other people to create that, so it makes sense to work in a team. It would make sense to have an idea of you and your mate having more than just the need to biologically interact to create more species, right? So I remember watching a program about cavemen, how at one point when they were mating, they would do it in a, well, let's say a more animalistic way, right? But at some point they attributed emotions to the process of creating progeny, so they would face each other. And that stuck with me as a novel kind of realization that we are layering these physicality or these physical movements with something that is more meaningful, to perhaps give it more emphasis in terms of its importance. Otherwise, if it is just a mechanical thing, then perhaps that might affect the socialization of what we bring into the world, those children. So yeah, I'd say it's something that we've kind of put into our culture, I think, and I think we pass it down through conditioning. but I don't think it's a tricky subject to say that it's hardwired into us, you know.
I guess like the way that you seem to be saying it is like it's evolved, maybe due to the fact, like you said, to give it more importance, but there must be some kind of benefit behind that. Like surely that creates a more stronger, reliable situation if
Yeah,
you give it
trust.
more importance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what relationship can work without trust? Scarier question would be that relationships that aren't based on trust are kept going for obviously the wrong reasons. And it could be even more scary if those reasons are rationalized by both parties. And yet you'll continuously have a cycle of mistrust that evolves or makes itself known through the interaction, either through heated, if not angry, say conversation, you know, because there's an underlying value there that's not being nurtured, or thinking that value doesn't have to be there. So yeah.
Well, that's an interesting thing as well because of like you say, what relationships can survive without trust, but at the same time most relationships are constantly changing, and sometimes there is a point in relationships that break down and then rebuild themselves. So is there love without trust? And also, if there are two parties that don't receive that strength or that trust from each party, then there must be this kind of um, selfish kind of reason to keep coming back to that. And therefore, that kind of brings me to my next question, which is I guess everybody has a different idea of what love is. And due to that, we're so like two people or however many people can enter a relationship and feel love, but what they're feeling is entirely different on both sides depending on their idea. So love seems to be like a big projection ground. Kind
There's a lot there. What's your specific question? Because there was something about you saying, is there love without trust, which keeps ringing through my mind. But what's your specific question now?
And then can love basically be, is love selfish then?
Is love selfish? No.
Love
I
just has
don't think
freedom.
true love is selfish. We could easily confuse it with passion or affection. You can be affectionate for someone you don't trust. I've been in a relationship where someone did not trust me and had a great affection for me. And so ultimately, that does not equal love. I've been in relationships where I've had great passion for people and considered it to be love because I have maybe, no, definitely stupidly confused one for the other, you know? And I can look at various media and blame that conditioning. But ultimately, once you realize what's going on, you've got to kind of use a certain kind of responsibility to not waste that person's time or indeed your own.
So in that case, it feels like what you're saying is love can't ever be selfish. Love always has to be for the benefit of the other person.
If it's selfish love, then I don't know if that's love, because you're not really caring enough to love that person if what you're doing is an ultimately selfish act or acts, you know. I think it's possible that your relationship, as you were saying before, or figuratively, a relationship can go through a fluidity of changes, but unless there's a bedrock of trust, then is it really fair to call it love? And even further still, even if you can't call it love, it might be functional enough for the both of you, for you both to be happy. Because, you know, we could easily go and talk about Hollywood and various different films that we've all been shown when we were younger, and they stay with us in terms of our conditioning and what we think is right and wrong in terms of our actions. Ultimately, if we're not trying to aspire to that Hollywoodized idea, that is probably a more healthy situation. but it doesn't necessarily mean you can call those situations based on love. It could be varied for so many different reasons and peoples and culture.
And what I find interesting is how everyone's always learning from their own personal experience. So if someone has been brought up without a certain kind of represented like example of love in front of them, then I guess really what that person might consider of as love. Who's to say whether it is love or not, if it is love for them? But then that can lead to a whole different array of versions of love walking around
Yeah,
based on that person's experience
yeah,
or
yeah.
examples. But there definitely does seem to be a general consensus of what love is.
Yeah, well, I mean, that general consensus, as I said, it's beholden to values that we may get from media, especially beyond that, like heteronormative ideas of love can obviously pollute the experience of love for others who have maybe or definitely recognize themselves outside of those, say, generalized value systems, you know? Like for example, I don't really care about Valentine's Day. But what if I got into a relationship with someone who, and everything else is great, what if they really truly valued Valentine's Day? Do I find myself performing on that day rather than being myself by buying chocolates and roses? Do I do that? Am I circumventing something that is really special for them because I've got my own beliefs? Do I compromise to make them happy? It would be very unlikely for me to get with someone who found themselves demanding that of me. And yet we are socialized with all these pop songs and movies as to what happens on that day.
Um,
You know?
I also find it interesting to kind of get other people's opinions on um, toxic love because of like what you kind of spoken about before instigates that you might feel like there's almost not a possibility for love to be toxic because love should be a selfless, all caring act. But at the same time, that involves a lot of giving towards the other person. And there doesn't seem to be a general consensus of when that's too much of a sacrifice.
Sorry, is that a question? It is, I just
Find
couldn't
their own
pick it
path
up.
and something for.
Sorry, one more time?
Just a general consensus doesn't seem to be there on what is too much sacrifice, what is giving too much of yourself
Okay.
for love, if love is supposed to be selfless anyway.
Yeah, there's two things there for me. One, you can put the idea of love on the pedestal, and there's also the other subject of not having enough respect for yourself. So therefore, you may not respect others. You may not be ready to experience love with someone else. So, I mean, quite a few months ago, actually, I thought it was okay for you to work these things out with someone else who was working these things out. Because ultimately, then you shouldn't necessarily feel you have to go without love in that way. Of recent times, and I can be so contrary, I think the idea of nurturing oneself and having a relationship is fine. You just don't have to have this end goal that it's going to be love, or having this end goal that they're going to be, you know, this special one. And obviously age can be a factor in that. But if you allow these pressures to control your choice of who you're with and how long you stay with them, then you could arguably finding yourself in a very weird scenario that you wouldn't normally, for want of a better word, settle for these people. But yeah, that's where I'm riffing. But I feel I'm not necessarily tackling the idea of toxicity in love that you asked me about. it's such a big subject.
Yeah, I personally feel like a lot of that can come from media as well, what we're fed, especially being a woman, like a girl, a lot of the time viewed in the media as the damsel in distress. Um, so I think that can enter a lot of people's minds at a really young age, um, and affect things.
I do have a few people on my social media feeds that will occasionally talk about misandry. They'll talk about how men are being used as a punching bag for society's issues in relationships by stronger women. I think that's bullshit. But I do want to bring it up as a topic and see what you thought of it.
Okay. So what's the question?
You will find, or at least I find, that there are men who say that they're not being treated properly in relationships when it comes to topics of independence, and topics of overall issues of patriarchy rebounding back onto those specific men in those relationships in a negative way. And I just feel that when men talk about this kind of thing, they often do so without realizing how the playing field isn't level. And that if they are talking about specific toxic moments in their relationship, fine, that's happened to you. I don't want to gaslight that shit. I can't. But to say that that's happening in many different relationships and that it's a huge problem, I find that very troublesome to believe. So I wanted to know what you thought about this.
Yeah, I don't agree. Like I feel it's not an even playing field. And just knowing like even a random example, being in a diner and on a road cafe, picking up a colouring book, and all of the colouring book pictures were princesses getting ready for their prince to take them to the ball. Like already that's something that like is quite like a minor part of the problem, but it still instigates the girl is around waiting for a guy and changing her appearance for him. Like everyone gets ready to go out, but it's things like that that make it not an even playing field, because you're taking this information in from like such a young age that by the time you actually get to the age of having relationships, it's something a lot bigger. Um,
Okay. Okay.
well, independence. When it comes to independence, I feel like it's basically a matter of how much both of you allow each other to have that freedom and be yourself and do what you want to do within the relationship. And I don't feel like that's even playing field from what I see and what I experience either. So I don't agree.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that
maybe.
there's a lot to work free from. Also, it's nobody personal fault. It's just like the information that we take in as well kind of forms these structures of like what's acceptable or what's not within the relationship before we even enter one. And I feel like especially within like young adults, and when you're probably going around to having your first relationship, I feel like still women are objectified more. Maybe there's more of a reason for someone to not want their girlfriend to go out alone. There's not a reason for it, but it happens more, like that's ultimately less freedom, less independence. And I also feel like you feel less independent when you are that significant person in the relationship. And yeah.
Yeah, I
It makes
guess.
you feel less like a go-getter.
Yeah. It all comes down to a certain amount of trust, as we keep saying. And if you trust in that relationship enough to communicate on a regular basis about these issues and not let them, obviously build up. I mean, shock horror, you'll sort out a lot of situational abuse before it could even happen. Because you'll enjoy solving the problems together. You know, going back to my idea about teamwork, you have to enjoy the idea of teamwork for it to really truly blossom as a worthwhile activity, because there's only so much you can do on your own. You know, I've recently finished a novel, but I don't think of it as just something that I did alone. There was so much knowledge that I got from other people who I consider mentors, and I got a lot of information regarding the very troubled protagonist, in terms of how to create them from a recent relationship. You know, there's so much dismantling has gone on in this time of COVID, and the explosion regarding race as a human rights issue. I couldn't let that book be finished without truly understanding enough of myself going into it. And obviously doing that meant understanding myself in relationship to other people, as well as relationships. So yeah, it's all about those factors: communication, trust, and yeah, dismantling. Yeah.
I also wonder, like, after you've spoken about that, do you actually think it's possible, like, this is another big question as well, to love anybody before you love yourself? Because I mean, if people are confused about what the idea of love is anyway, then how do you even arrive at the point of loving yourself, let alone others?
Can you love someone before you love yourself? I asked this on Facebook a couple weeks ago now. In fact, it's actually a couple months ago. And we did speak about this in our initial conversation for your project, Ruby, didn't we? As I said in this actual video, I'm very contrary, but I've come from a place of thinking that you have to, it's so heavy to talk about. At this moment in time, I think that if you're going to truly be able to love someone, then yeah, you have to kind of love yourself. Otherwise, you're going to end up disrespecting them in certain ways. But I flip so much on this. I just don't want to find myself in a situation where I'm being emotionally abusive or being abused because I have not done enough looking into myself. I don't want to waste their time. I don't want to waste my time. And yet, you know, that there's going to be a need to be with people and for them to be with you. Communication, man, that's, it may seem like an easy get out, but I suppose if people are talking about things, if they are attracted to the other person, then great. If they're not, then there's obviously going to be, you know, issues along the way. And at the same time, sometimes it's good to have a certain kind of attraction from someone and for you to be attracted to them, but not necessarily work on it. It's like another form of communication. You know, I think a lot of men have this as an issue, that they don't get it when someone is flirting with them as a form of flattery, but not necessarily looking to get anything out of it, you know?
Okay, so with that, I guess the next thing that I'd want to kind of bring up is how everyone, regardless of whether it ends up good or bad, learns quite a lot through their loves, about themselves as well. So as much as you answered that question, saying that you feel like possibly you can't love anybody until you love yourself, perhaps those mistakes that come up or those problems that come up are really is kind of a detached way of thinking about it. But is it a possibility that they could be just a lesson that you've got to learn on your journey before you end up in the right love?
Yes, without being reductionist about it as much as possible or being transactional, but yeah, and that has been said to me, that when we are breaking up, we're not necessarily just doing something which may seem destructive. You've learned something from me, I've learned something from you. You take that into the next relationship, you know? Like there is someone who I'm having so many issues with from afar, just in terms of how they are treating someone else. and I'm very aware that person has only gone out with one other person in their adult life, it's not cool to use that person as a place to continually not understand that you've got to move on. Do you know what I mean? Without going into specifics about that situation, once you realize that it's becoming damaging, then you've got to get out of there. And then again, when you find yourself in a situation where you're ignoring that, you've got to at some point forgive yourself once you do leave and know that you did spend too much time there, because we're only human. The trick is for your next relationship for you not to repeat that, otherwise you're just being a fucking dickhead. You know, so yeah, there's a lot that I guess can be gleaned from understanding people as lessons. Yeah.
Well, that's about all the questions I can muster on at the moment. I'm probably going to get loads once we leave. But...
Well, we did say this would be the first of two parts because, as we've discussed before in other conversations, there's always going to be, like, you know, other stuff that you think about later, or indeed the questions that you had before that you don't have to hand now. You know, if you want to do this again, as in part two, I'm thinking it's going to happen, then I'm up for that. That's great. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, Ruby, and thank you, viewers. As you may or may not know, every Friday, there is a Rantbox TV episode, and you are more than welcome to submit any questions that you have, or indeed, if you want to be a guest, message me via Rantbox TV, or the information you need is in the description box. This has been great, and thank you, Ruby, again for being here and being so eloquent with your questions and information.
Thank you.
That's okay. No worries. I shall see you in the future. Bye-bye.